Cogburn.
What do you want, girl?
I'm looking for the man who killed my father.
Hollywood has a reputation for destroying great source material, especially when adapting novels, true stories, and folklore into westerns. But against all odds, 15 times the industry actually got it right, staying faithful to the spirit of their sources while creating something cinematically brilliant. Prepare to discover the adaptations that prove Hollywood can honor the past without ruining it. Number 15, True Grit, 2010. The Coen brothers faced enormous pressure adapting Charles Portis's novel, True Grit. Not just because the book was beloved, but because John Wayne's 1969 version had become iconic, despite taking massive liberties with the source material. Wayne's Oscar-winning performance transformed Rooster Cogburn into a lovable drunk, sanitizing much of the novel's darker elements and centering the story on the marshal instead of 14-year-old Maddie Ross. The Coens returned to Portis's text with almost religious devotion, recreating the novel's distinctive voice and restoring Maddie as the unquestioned protagonist. Here's what makes this adaptation remarkable. The Coens captured Portis's precise, formal 19th century language, having characters speak in the same archaic, biblical cadences that made the novel so distinctive. Haley Steinfeld's performance as Maddie embodied the character's fierce intelligence and moral certainty, earning her an Oscar nomination at just 14 years old, despite being in nearly every scene. Jeff Bridges played Rooster Cogburn as genuinely dangerous and morally ambiguous, closer to Portis's vision than Wayne's crowd-pleasing interpretation. The film earned 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, proving faithful adaptation could achieve both critical acclaim and commercial success. Roger Deakins' cinematography captured the harsh, unromantic frontier Portis described, snow-covered landscapes devoid of the usual Western grandeur. The Coens included the novel's framing device, showing older Maddie reflecting on her adventure, adding melancholy absent from the Wayne version. They preserved Portis's darkly comic tone, balancing violence with absurdist humor in ways the original film avoided. Josh Brolin's portrayal of Tom Chaney stayed true to the pathetic, cowardly killer from the novel rather than elevating him into a worthy antagonist. The adaptation's success demonstrated that returning to source material could revitalize even well-known stories, offering audiences something simultaneously familiar and fresh. Number 14, 3 10 to Yuma, 2007.
Robberies, over $400,000 in losses.
Y'all notice he didn't mention any of the lives I've taken.
We will have...
James Mangold's adaptation of Elmore, Leonard's short story expanded a lean, tense narrative into a full-length character study, while preserving everything that made the source material brilliant. Leonard's original 1953 story focused on a down-on-his-luck rancher hired to escort a captured outlaw to the train that'll take him to prison. The entire tale, unfolding with spare, efficient prose across maybe 30 pages. The 2007 film stretched that premise into nearly 2 hours, but never felt padded, because Mangold understood Leonard's real subject wasn't the destination, but the psychological warfare between captor and captive. Here's where it gets interesting. Leonard wrote crime fiction disguised as westerns, more interested in moral complexity than shootouts, and Mangold honored that by making the relationship between Dan Evans and Ben Wade the film's centerpiece. Russell Crowe's Wade embodied Leonard's charming sociopath perfectly, a killer who quotes the Bible and sketches birds while casually murdering anyone who inconveniences him. Christian Bale played Evans as increasingly desperate, his pride and poverty pushing him toward irrational heroism. The film added Evans's relationship with his son, not present in Leonard's story, but this expansion felt organic rather than Hollywood sentiment, because it raised the stakes psychologically. Leonard's dialogue translated almost verbatim to screen, those clipped, sardonic exchanges revealing character through what's unsaid as much as spoken. Mangold preserved the story's central question about why Evans continues a suicide mission, when Wade keeps offering him escape routes and money. The answer in both versions has nothing to do with justice and everything to do with masculine pride and desperate dignity. The film's climactic shootout expanded Leonard's understated ending, but maintained his theme that heroism often stems from stubbornness rather than nobility. the adaptation proved Leonard's crime fiction approach to westerns could work in modern cinema, paving the way for more psychologically complex frontier films. Number 13. The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, 2007.
Can't believe I'm sitting with none other than Jesse James. Many's the night I stayed up, my eyes open and my mouth.
Andrew Dominik adapted Ron Hansen's novel into a meditative deconstruction of American mythology, preserving the book's literary approach to the Western while creating something visually and emotionally devastating. Hansen's novel approached the Jesse James legend from Robert Ford's perspective, examining how hero worship curdles into resentment and ultimately murder. The book read more like poetry than typical Western fiction, Hansen's prose baroque and melancholy, and Dominik somehow translated that literary density into purely cinematic language. Here's what makes this adaptation exceptional. The film runs 2 hours and 40 minutes, a runtime most studios would consider commercial suicide for a Western. But Dominik needed that length to capture Hansen's slow-building psychological portrait. Roger Deakins' cinematography recreated period photographs, every frame looking like a Matthew Brady image come to life, creating visual poetry that matched Hansen's prose. Brad Pitt's performance as Jesse James captured the novel's depiction of the outlaw as paranoid, cruel, and charismatic, a man aware his legend had eclipsed his humanity. Casey Affleck embodied Ford's desperate need for recognition, his pathetic worship of Jesse making the inevitable betrayal even more tragic. Dominik preserved Hansen's structure, showing the aftermath of Jesse's death before depicting the events leading to it, creating dramatic irony that haunted every scene. Nick Cave's score and narration incorporated actual passages from Hansen's novel, the voiceover functioning as the film's conscience and contextualizing the myth-making happening in real time. The adaptation included minor characters and subplots from the novel most filmmakers would have cut, understanding that Hansen's digressive approach was the point, not padding. The film showed how celebrity and violence intertwine, how Ford murdered the real Jesse but could never kill the legend. Themes Hansen explored across 400 pages that Dominik condensed into imagery and performance. Critics initially dismissed the film as too slow, but it's aged into a masterpiece precisely because Dominik refused to compromise Hansen's vision. Number 12. The Revenant, 2015. Alejandro González Iñárritu adapted Michael Punke's novel about Hugh Glass's legendary survival and revenge, taking substantial liberties with specific events while capturing the book's primal brutality and obsessive drive. Punke's thoroughly researched novel documented Glass's 1823 ordeal after a grisly attack left him near death, and his companions abandoned him in the wilderness. The book emphasized historical accuracy and frontier survival details, while Iñárritu focused on creating visceral, almost hallucinatory cinema. Here's what's crucial about this adaptation. Despite changing numerous specifics, Iñárritu preserved what mattered most: Glass's inhuman endurance and the moral question of whether survival justifies vengeance. Leonardo DiCaprio's mostly silent performance conveyed the physical and psychological torment Punke described across hundreds of pages, his face and body becoming the text. Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography used only natural light, forcing the production to shoot during specific hours that created the harsh, unforgiving beauty Punke's prose evoked. The film simplified certain plot elements from the novel while amplifying others, adding the murdered son subplot that gave Glass's revenge quest more immediate emotional weight than Punke's historically accurate version. Iñárritu understood that Punke's book wasn't really about historical recreation, but about testing human limits, so he prioritized authenticity of feeling over factual accuracy. The infamous bear attack scene became cinema legend, its brutal realism capturing what Punke could only describe in words, making audiences viscerally understand the miracle of Glass's survival. Tom Hardy's Fitzgerald embodied frontier amorality, his pragmatic evil contrasting Glass's stubborn nobility in ways that honored Punke's examination of Weich's frontier ethics. The film's ending diverged from both the novel and historical record, but felt emotionally true to Glass's journey, leaving revenge incomplete and hollow. The Revenant won 3 Oscars, including Best Director and Best Actor, proving that ambitious literary adaptation could achieve both artistic and commercial success. Number 11. Lonesome Dove, 1989 miniseries.
Why not go up to Montana?
And we're a shade old to start fighting Indians all over again, don't you think?
Simon Winsor's 8-hour miniseries adaptation of Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel stands as perhaps the most faithful Western adaptation ever produced, translating nearly 900 pages of dense, character-driven storytelling into television without losing McMurtry's distinctive voice. The novel follows aging Texas Rangers Augustus McCrae and Woodrow Call on a cattle drive from Texas to Montana. But that simple premise conceals McMurtry's real achievement, creating a sprawling, melancholy meditation on friendship, aging, dreams, and the dying West. The miniseries preserved nearly every major plot point and character from the novel across its extended runtime. Here's what makes this adaptation definitive. The casting proved perfect, with Robert Duvall embodying Gus's philosophical charm, and Tommy Lee Jones capturing Call's repressed emotionalism exactly as McMurtry wrote them. The miniseries had time to include supporting characters and subplots most film adaptations would sacrifice, from Jake Spoon's moral deterioration to Lorena's traumatic captivity to July Johnson's doomed search. McMurtry's dialogue translated directly to screen, those long, rambling conversations between Gus and Call, revealing their relationship's depth through what they don't say as much as what they do. The production filmed in actual frontier locations, capturing the landscape's harshness and beauty McMurtry described in loving detail throughout the novel. The adaptation preserved McMurtry's unsentimental approach to Western violence, showing gunfights and deaths as ugly, random, and unheroic rather than balletic. The miniseries format allowed proper pacing for McMurtry's slow-building character development, letting audiences understand why Gus's death in the final hours devastates despite being telegraphed from the beginning. Bill Whitliff's screenplay captured McMurtry's themes about how the West died before its legends did, how Call and Gus represent the last of something already obsolete. The adaptation won 7 Emmy Awards and became the highest-rated miniseries of the decade, proving audiences would embrace complex, adult westerns if given the chance. Number 10. No Country for Old Men, 2007.
What's the most you ever lost from a coin toss?
The Coen brothers adapted Cormac McCarthy's novel with almost fanatical devotion to the source text, understanding that McCarthy's spare, philosophical prose demanded cinematic equivalence rather than traditional movie dialogue and exposition. McCarthy's 2005 novel set a drug deal gone wrong in 1980 West Texas, but beneath the thriller plot lurked meditation on violence, fate, and moral decay. The Coens recognized that McCarthy's real subject was the breakdown of old codes and certainties in modern America. Here's where it gets brilliant. The screenplay included entire passages of McCarthy's dialogue verbatim, trusting the novelist's ear for how people actually speak in tense, life or death situations. Javier Bardem's Anton Chigurh embodied McCarthy's philosophical killer perfectly. Those coin flip scenes translating the novel's musings on fate into pure terror. Tommy Lee Jones's Sheriff Ed Tom Bell delivered McCarthy's monologues about not understanding the modern world, his voice becoming the novel's moral center. The Coens preserved McCarthy's narrative structure, including the anticlimactic resolution that frustrated some viewers but honored the novel's themes about how violence renders heroic action meaningless. They eliminated nearly all score, letting silence and ambient sound create the oppressive atmosphere McCarthy achieved through sparse description. Roger Deakins' cinematography captured West Texas, as McCarthy described it, harsh, beautiful, and indifferent to human suffering. The adaptation kept McCarthy's technique of withholding information, trusting audiences to follow complex plotting without excessive exposition. Josh Brolin's Llewellyn Moss played the doomed everyman exactly as written. His ordinary decency no match for the chaos he's unleashed. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay, proving McCarthy's uncompromising vision could succeed commercially without dilution. The Coens understood that McCarthy wrote westerns about the death of Western values, and their adaptation honored that paradox perfectly. Number 9. The Outlaw Josey Wales, 1976.
This Wales to kingdom come.
Because of what you did here today, I've got to kill that man.
Clint Eastwood adapted Forrest Carter's novel, Gone to Texas, into a complex examination of violence, revenge, and redemption that improved on problematic source material by emphasizing its better qualities while downplaying its worst. Carter's novel followed Missouri farmer Josey Wales on a revenge quest after Union soldiers murdered his family during the Civil War. The story steeped in lost cause mythology and romantic violence. Eastwood and screenwriters Philip Kaufman and Sonia Chernus transformed this into something more sophisticated, a film about how cycles of violence can be broken. Here's what makes this adaptation significant. The film preserved the novel's basic plot, but fundamentally altered its themes, using the Western revenge framework to explore reconciliation rather than glorify Confederate nostalgia. Eastwood's performance made Wales more morally ambiguous than Carter's idealized hero, showing how revenge consumes the Avenger as much as his targets. Chief Dan George's lone Waddy added humor and wisdom largely absent from Carter's novel, his character representing an alternative to Wales's violent path. The screenplay invented the film's most powerful theme, Wales gradually building a surrogate family from outcasts and former enemies, creating community to replace what violence destroyed. Carter's novel wallowed in violence. Eastwood's film examined violence's costs. The adaptation softened Carter's racist elements while preserving the story's critique of military brutality and bureaucratic hypocrisy. Sandra Locke's Laura Lee became a more active character than in the novel, her romance with Wales representing the possibility of new beginnings. The film's ending diverged from the novels, choosing symbolic death and rebirth over literal resolution, suggesting Wales could finally escape his past. Eastwood understood that Carter's novel succeeded despite its ideology, not because of it, so the adaptation extracted the archetypal revenge quest while discarding the lost cause propaganda. The result became one of the greatest Western films, proof that adaptation can redeem flawed source material. Number 8. Unforgiven, 1992.
A whipping? That's all they get after what they've done? Get out of there!
It was a matter of honor.
Clint Eastwood adapted David Webb Peoples' original screenplay with the understanding that, while not based on a novel, the script's literary qualities demanded preservation during production. Peoples wrote Unforgiven across years of development, creating a screenplay that read like a novel in its psychological depth and thematic complexity. Eastwood recognized that Peoples had written a deconstruction of every Western myth, including myths Eastwood himself had built across decades of frontier films. Here's what makes this adaptation of screenplay to screen remarkable. Eastwood filmed Peoples' script almost exactly as written, preserving dialogue and structure that subverted Western conventions at every turn. William Money emerged as an anti-hero who wasn't romanticized. He's an alcoholic pig farmer whose past violence haunts him, and his return to killing brings no satisfaction or redemption. Gene Hackman's Little Bill Daggett embodied Peoples' villain as law enforcement, a sheriff whose brutality masquerades as civilization, challenging the audience's assumptions about frontier justice. The screenplay's most radical element was its treatment of violence, showing gunfights as ugly, confused affairs where luck matters more than skill. And Eastwood's direction made that ugliness visceral. Richard Harris's English Bob sequence demonstrated how Western legends get manufactured, the truth far less impressive than the stories. The adaptation preserved Peoples' theme that violence corrupts everyone it touches, even the reluctant killer trying to escape his past. Morgan Freeman's Ned Logan represented the cost of returning to violence, his death arbitrary and meaningless, exactly as Peoples intended. Francis Fisher's Strawberry Alice and the prostitutes became more than victims. their agency in hiring the killers complicating simple moral judgments. The screenplay's ending required money to become the monster he'd tried to escape, and Eastwood's performance conveyed the tragedy of that transformation. Unforgiven won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture, proving that sophisticated, self-aware westerns could achieve mainstream success. The film vindicated people's decade-long development process and Eastwood's faith in preserving the screenplay's integrity. Number 7. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971.
It's hard to hold the hand of anyone who's reaching for the sky just to surrender.
Ma'am, is there something I can do for you?
Do you have anything to eat? I'm bloody starving.
Robert Altman adapted Edmund Naughton's novel, McCabe, into a radical reimagining of Western mythology, transforming a straightforward story into something experimental and melancholy that captured the frontier's capitalist reality rather than its romantic myths. Naughton's novel followed a small-time gambler, establishing a brothel in a mining town, but Altman saw potential for something stranger and more truthful. The film preserved the novel's basic premise while completely reinventing its aesthetic approach to Western storytelling. Here's what makes this adaptation revolutionary. Altman recorded overlapping dialogue, letting actors improvise and talk over each other in ways that created naturalistic chaos, absent from traditional Westerns. Warren Beatty's McCabe emerged as a delusional hustler rather than Naughton's more competent protagonist. His pretensions of being a gunfighter undermined at every turn. Julie Christie's Mrs. Miller became a full partner rather than mere love interest. Her business acumen and opium addiction creating complexity the novel only suggested. Vilmos Zsigmond's cinematography rejected Western visual conventions, using filters and techniques that made everything look cold, muddy, and unglamorous. Altman set the film during constant rain and snow, the miserable weather reflecting frontier life's actual hardship rather than Hollywood's sunny vistas. The adaptation incorporated Leonard Cohen's songs anachronistically on the soundtrack, creating emotional distance and ironic commentary on the action. Altman preserved Naughton's ending, where McCabe freezes to death while Mrs. Miller smokes opium, choosing capitalism and addiction over heroism and romance. The film showed the West as fundamentally a real estate venture, its mythology a con game obscuring exploitation and violence. Critics initially dismissed McCabe and Mrs. Miller as too weird and depressing, but it's aged into a masterpiece precisely because Altman refused to compromise his vision. The adaptation proved Westerns could be art films, could challenge genre conventions while still honoring their source material's essential truths. Number 6. HUD, 1963.
How'd a man like you come to be a son to me?
Well, that's easy. I was no bundle left on a doorstep.
Martin Ritt adapted Larry McMurtry's novel, Horseman, Pass, by into a contemporary Western that preserved the book's critique of changing values while creating one of cinema's most complex anti-heroes. McMurtry's first novel depicted life on a declining Texas ranch through the eyes of teenager Lonnie, observing the conflict between his principled grandfather Homer and his immoral uncle Hud. The West's film retained McMurtry's structure and themes, while sharpening the generational conflict into something searingly relevant to 1960s America. Here's what makes this adaptation powerful. James Wong, Howe's black and white cinematography captured the stark, harsh landscape McMurtry described, creating visual poetry from dusty plains and dying cattle. Paul Newman's HUD embodied McMurtry's character perfectly charming, selfish, and morally bankrupt, representing modernity's values divorced from ethics. Melvin Douglas won an Oscar for playing Homer Bannon, the old rancher whose integrity feels increasingly obsolete in HUD's pragmatic world. The adaptation preserved McMurtry's central tragedy. The younger generation learns the wrong lessons, drawn to HUD's charisma rather than Homer's principles. Brandon DeWilde's Lonnie served as the novel's and film's moral battleground, torn between admiring HUD's confidence and recognizing his emptiness. Patricia Neal won Best Actress for Alma, the housekeeper who sees through HUD's charm to his essential corruption. Her attempted rape scene more explicit than McMurtry could write in 1961. The screenplay by Irving Ravitch and Harriet Frank Jr. sharpened McMurtry's dialogue, making the philosophical conflicts between Homer and Hud more pointed without betraying the novel's themes. The adaptation retained McMurtry's unsentimental view of ranch life, showing it as economically precarious and emotionally isolating rather than romantic. The film ended exactly as the novel did, with Lonnie leaving the ranch and Hud unchanged, offering no false redemption or easy answers. Hud earned 7 Oscar nominations, proving adult, literary westerns could succeed commercially. Number 5, Open Range, 2003.
Here, man. Not much for running from cowards. I see the marshal ain't with you. You won't find it so funny.
Kevin Costner adapted Lauren Payne's novel, The Open Range Men, into a classical western that honored both the genre's traditions and the source material's moral complexity. Payne's novel followed free-range cattlemen, confronting a ruthless landowner trying to control the territory through violence and intimidation. The basic story was pure Western formula, but Payne invested it with genuine character development and ethical depth. Costner recognized these qualities and preserved them while creating something visually spectacular. Here's where it gets interesting. The screenplay by Craig Storper stayed remarkably faithful to Payne's plot and characters, particularly the relationship between Boss Spearman and Charlie Waite, aging cowboys confronting one last violent conflict. Robert Duvall's boss embodied Payne's wise, principled cattleman perfectly, his moral code absolute despite the personal costs. Costner's Charlie captured the novel's tortured gunfighter trying to escape his violent past, knowing he'll eventually have to embrace it again. The film preserved Payne's theme that violence sometimes becomes necessary to defend freedom and dignity, but never without consequences. Annette Bening's Sue Barlow expanded her role from the novel, but this elaboration felt organic because it raised the stakes for Charlie's choice between violence and domesticity. Michael Gambon's villain, Denton Baxter, represented corrupt power exactly as Payne wrote him, brutal and cowardly when confronted directly. The adaptation's climactic shootout took Payne's brief action sequence and made it cinema's most realistic gunfight, showing violence as chaotic, terrifying, and devastating, rather than choreographed heroism. Costner's direction emphasized landscape and silence, letting Payne's spare prose translate into visual storytelling that trusted audiences to understand character without excessive dialogue. The film's pacing reflected Payne's deliberate narrative rhythm, building slowly toward inevitable violence while developing relationships that made the conflict's resolution matter emotionally. Open Range proved classical westerns could still work if made with intelligence, craft, and respect for source material. Number 4. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962.
That's my steak, Valance. But you heard him, dude. Pick it up.
John Ford adapted Dorothy M. Johnson's short story into a meditation on truth, legend, and the death of the Old West that expanded the source material while preserving its essential themes. Johnson's story examined how historical myths get created, contrasting the legend of Senator Ransom Stoddard shooting outlaw Liberty Valance with the unheroic reality. Ford recognized this as perfect subject matter for his own reckoning with the Western genre he'd spent decades defining. Here's what makes this adaptation brilliant. Ford preserved Johnson's narrative structure, framing the true story as a flashback during Stoddard's return for Tom Doniphan's funeral, creating dramatic irony that haunted every scene. James Stewart's Ransom embodied Johnson's idealistic lawyer perfectly, his Eastern education and moral certitude ill-equipped for frontier violence. John Wayne's Tom Doniphan became Ford's most tragic character, the man who actually killed Valance but remained unknown because the myth served civilization better than truth. Lee Marvin's Valance represented pure frontier evil, his sadistic violence making clear why the West needed taming, even as the film mourned what was lost. The screenplay by James Warner Bella and Willis Goldbeck expanded Johnson's spare story into a full examination of how law replaces violence, how civilization requires destroying the very men who make it possible. Ford's direction emphasized the tale's theatrical artificiality, shooting on obvious sound stages that underscored the story's focus on myth-making rather than realism. Vera Miles's Hallie represented the human cost of progress, her love for Tom sacrificed for marriage to Ransom and the civilized future he represents. The adaptation preserved Johnson's devastating final line about printing the legend when the truth contradicts it. Ford's camera lingering on Wayne's forgotten. Coffin? The film flopped initially. Audiences unprepared for Ford's melancholy deconstruction of Western heroism, but it's aged into one of the genre's masterpieces. Number 3, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, 1948.
Shut your trap! Shut up, or I'll smash your head flat! Ah! Throw it! Without me, you two would die here more miserable than rats!
Leave him alone. Can't you see the old man?
John Huston adapted B. Travin's novel into an examination of greed and paranoia that preserved the book's dark psychology while creating one of cinema's greatest character studies. Travin's 1927 novel followed 3 Americans searching for gold in Mexican mountains, their expedition deteriorating as paranoia and greed corrupt their partnership. The book was philosophical and cynical, influenced by Travin's own mysterious past and leftist politics. Huston recognized the novel's themes about capitalism's corrosive effects and translated them into pure cinema. Here's what makes this adaptation exceptional. The screenplay included substantial passages of Travin's dialogue verbatim, particularly Howard's speeches about gold's effect on men's souls. Humphrey Bogart's Fred C. Dobbs embodied Travin's descent from decent man to paranoid murderer, his performance showing the gradual corruption rather than sudden transformation. Walter Huston won Best Supporting Actor for Howard, the old prospector whose wisdom about human nature proved tragically accurate. The film shot on location in Mexico, capturing the harsh landscape Traven described and creating visual authenticity that enhanced the story's psychological realism. Huston preserved Travin's narrative structure, including the ironic ending where bandits scatter the gold dust to the wind, all the suffering and death rendered meaningless. The adaptation retained the novel's critique of American capitalism and imperialism, showing the protagonists as fundamentally exploitative despite their working-class status. Ted McCord's cinematography created oppressive atmosphere, the beautiful landscape becoming a prison as paranoia takes hold. The film included Travin's Mexican bandits not as stereotypes, but as complex characters responding rationally to American exploitation. Huston's direction emphasized character over action, long scenes of dialogue revealing psychology that built toward inevitable violence. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre won 3 Oscars, including Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay, proving literary adaptation could achieve both artistic and commercial success while preserving dark, uncommercial themes. Number 2, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969.
Hole-in-the-wall gang struck
Butch Cassidy's hole-in-the-wall gang, that's me.
Idaho Bank of over close to $20,000.
You want Harvey to do your planning for you? You want him to do your thinking for you? You want him to run things?
William Goldman adapted historical accounts of outlaws Robert Leroy Parker and Harry Longabaugh into a screenplay that honored the truth while creating something cinematically fresh. Goldman researched extensively, reading everything available about Butch and Sundance, then made the crucial decision to focus on their friendship and charm, rather than their crimes. The adaptation succeeded by understanding that historical truth matters less than emotional truth, that the legend of these charming rogues contains something more interesting than strict biographical accuracy. Here's what makes this adaptation work. Goldman preserved documented facts: the super posse chase, the Bolivia relocation, the final shootout while inventing dialogue, and scenes that captured the historical figures' reported personalities. Paul Newman's Butch and Robert Redford's Sundance embodied the chemistry Goldman wrote, their banter revealing deep friendship beneath the jokes. The screenplay included Etta Place as more than historical footnote, Catherine Ross's performance making her the emotional center that grounded the outlaws' adventures. Goldman understood that Butch and Sundance represented the Old West's end, their obsolescence in a modernizing world more tragic than their deaths. The adaptation's most controversial element was its modern sensibility, the anachronistic score, the comic tone, the self-aware dialogue, but these choices made the characters accessible rather than museum pieces. Conrad Hall's cinematography captured Bolivia's harsh beauty exactly as Goldman envisioned, the landscape becoming character itself. The film preserved the historical ambiguity about their final fate, that freeze-frame ending suggesting immortality through legend, rather than showing definitive death. Goldman's research informed every scene even when inventing specifics, the screenplay feeling historically grounded despite liberal interpretation. The adaptation earned Goldman an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, though it's technically adaptation of historical sources into fiction. Butch Cassidy proved that honoring historical subjects didn't require documentary accuracy, that capturing their spirit mattered more than recreating facts. Number 1, The Searchers, 1956.
I found him. I found Lucy.
What you saw was a buck wearing Lucy's dress.
John Ford and Frank S. Nugent adapted Alan LeMay's novel into what many consider the greatest Western ever made, transforming a straightforward revenge quest into a psychologically complex examination of racism, obsession, and redemption. LeMay's 1954 novel followed Amos Edwards searching for his niece Debbie after Comanche warriors kidnapped her, the story steeped in frontier violence and racial hatred. Ford and Nugent preserved the novel's basic plot while deepening its themes and complicating its hero into something far more disturbing and fascinating. Here's why this adaptation stands above all others. The screenplay changed the protagonist's name from Amos to Ethan and gave him to John Wayne, casting against type to create cinema's most complex anti-hero. Ford emphasized the racism LeMay suggested, making explicit that Ethan might kill Debbie rather than rescue her if she's been contaminated by living as Comanche. Jeffrey Hunter's Martin Pauly became more central than in the novel, his mixed Cherokee heritage creating ironic counterpoint to Ethan's hatred. Nugent's screenplay sharpened LeMay's dialogue into something more poetic and biblical, Ethan's pronouncements taking on prophetic weight. Ford's direction transformed Monument Valley into emotional landscape, those iconic doorway shots creating visual metaphors absent from LeMay's prose. The adaptation preserved the novel's ambiguity about whether Ethan's quest represents heroism or madness, leaving audiences unsettled rather than satisfied. Natalie Wood's Debbie became more developed than LeMay's version, her transformation into Comanche wife challenging Ethan's certainty. The film's ending diverged from the novels, Ethan's decision to spare Debbie representing redemption. LeMay only hinted at that final doorway shot showing Ethan unable to enter civilization he helped create. Ford understood that LeMay wrote about the frontier's moral complexity, and the adaptation amplified those themes into something profound. The Searchers influenced every Western that followed, proving that genre films could achieve genuine artistry. From Cormac McCarthy to Larry McMurtry, these 15 adaptations proved Hollywood could honor great source material without destroying it in translation. Which faithful adaptation deserves more recognition? Share your thoughts and subscribe for more deep dives into how Hollywood occasionally gets it right.